Los Angeles, a city of sunshine and dreams. Mansions perch on hillsides, offering breathtaking views of the Pacific. But beneath the veneer of glamour and glitz, a darker reality simmers. Drive just a few miles from the manicured lawns of Beverly Hills and you'll encounter a different world. Here, families struggle to survive in the shadows of affluence. Homelessness is rampant, with tents lining the sidewalks beneath freeway overpasses. This is the Los Angeles that tourists rarely see, where the American dream feels like a distant promise. The economic disparities plaguing Los Angeles didn't emerge overnight. They are the result of decades of policy decisions favoring the wealthy. Since the early 2000s, the gap between the rich and everyone else has been widening. The richest 1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Take, for example, Maria, a single mother of two in South Central Los Angeles. Maria works 2 minimum wage jobs but can barely afford to put food on the table. In Los Angeles, the median home price is over $800,000, while the minimum wage is $15 an hour. This means many residents are priced out of the housing market. The economic divide is not just about numbers, it's about real people, real families, and real lives being torn apart. The growing chasm between the rich and the poor has created a palpable sense of tension in Los Angeles. The city feels like a tinderbox, with the potential for unrest simmering just below the surface. On one hand, you have the opulence of Beverly Hills. On the other, neighborhoods like Skid Row, where thousands sleep on the streets each night. This stark juxtaposition of wealth and poverty is a constant reminder of deep inequalities. It's breeding resentment and anger. This anger is often directed at symbols of wealth and privilege. The police, often seen as instruments of the status quo, are caught in the middle. The city feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for the spark that will ignite the flames of unrest. The incident that ignited the city was seemingly insignificant, a minor traffic stop gone wrong. A young black man pulled over for a broken taillight ended up dead at the hands of a police officer. The details were murky, with conflicting accounts from witnesses and the police, but one thing was clear. The incident was the spark that ignited the tinderbox of resentment and anger. The video of the incident, captured on a bystander's cell phone, went viral. For many, it was a chilling reminder of systemic racism and police brutality. Protests erupted in the streets, initially peaceful demonstrations demanding justice. But as the sun set, the protests grew larger and angrier. The police, caught off guard by the intensity of the protests, responded with force. The images of these clashes further inflamed the situation. What began as a local protest quickly escalated into a citywide uprising. The unrest that began in Los Angeles didn't remain confined to the city limits. Like a virus, it spread rapidly to other cities across the nation. Fueled by social media, the images of the protests became a rallying cry for those who felt marginalized and unheard. From New York to Chicago, people took to the streets, their voices rising in a chorus of anger and frustration. The protests soon morphed into a broader indictment of the deep-seated inequalities that plagued American society. The government's response was slow and inadequate. Politicians seemed paralyzed by the crisis. The nation, once a beacon of hope and opportunity, seemed to be teetering on the brink of collapse. As the crisis deepened, it became tragically clear that the burden of the collapse was not being shared equally. The most vulnerable communities were bearing the brunt of the crisis. In Los Angeles, neighborhoods like South Central and Watts became epicenters of unrest and despair. With businesses shuttered and jobs lost, the economic fallout hit these communities the hardest. Food banks were overwhelmed, unable to keep up with the surging demand. Hospitals, already stretched thin, were inundated with patients. The crisis served as a stark reminder that the American dream remained out of reach for far too many. The most insidious consequence of the crisis was perhaps the erosion of trust and social cohesion. The nation, already deeply divided, seemed to fracture even further. The shared sense of purpose and identity was replaced by suspicion, fear, and resentment. The media often amplified the divisions. Social media platforms became echo chambers, reinforcing existing biases. The breakdown of trust extended to institutions as well. This erosion of trust in institutions created a fertile ground for extremism and further unrest. The crisis that gripped Los Angeles and spread across the nation served as a stark reminder that the social contract had been broken. The promise of America rang hollow for millions trapped in a cycle of poverty, inequality, and despair. Across the nation, the same underlying issues threatened to unravel the social fabric. The crisis in Los Angeles was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much deeper malaise. The idea that individual effort alone is sufficient to overcome systemic barriers had always been a flawed premise. The crisis made it clear that structural inequalities were holding back millions of Americans. The crisis served as a wake-up call, a stark reminder that the time for complacency is over. The deep-seated inequalities and divisions plaguing American society can no longer be swept under the rug. The urgency of the moment demands bold action to heal the wounds of the past and build a more just and equitable future. This will require a fundamental shift in priorities, investing in communities that have been left behind. It will require addressing systemic racism and discrimination. It will require a renewed commitment to civic engagement and political participation. The road ahead will be long and arduous. There will be setbacks and resistance, but the pursuit of a more just and equitable society is a fight worth having. The crisis in Los Angeles offered a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit yearns for connection and community. The protests reflected a deep-seated desire for change. The outpouring of support for those in need demonstrated that the bonds of human connection remain strong. It is up to us to heed the lessons of the past and create a future where all Americans have the opportunity to live up to their full potential.